Good morning. My name is Gary Williams, and I'm with AARP New Mexico. I am this morning proud to be able to represent AARP as well as AARP's foundation as I present information relating to social isolation, loneliness, and its effects. I'd like to walk through a somewhat truncated presentation this morning that provides some insight as to issues of importance as we deal with these important subject matters. AARP has dedicated resources, specifically through AARP's foundation, which is our nonprofit side that deals with public policy and research, to provide information and insight to individuals around this particular subject matter, among many others. So what I'd like to do is to start my presentation, and I welcome questions that can be submitted, and I will try to address as many as I can with the time allocated. Remaining questions can be answered at a later time through staff at the Alzheimer's Association. So let's get started. I'm going to talk today a little bit about impacts of social isolation and loneliness. I'll also bring into the conversation what is social isolation and what does it look like. We'll also talk about differences between isolation and loneliness, what you can do about the situations that we'll be discussing today, what local resources and organizations are positioned to provide assistance to those who are in need. We'll talk a little bit about how to fix broken connections, as well as what is AARP doing to provide resources to help individuals as they continue on their journey. We'll conclude with a basic information slide on AARP's foundation and Connect to Effect, which is a program within. So let's get started. Social isolation is a condition that affects nearly 1 in 5 older adults. Now, that's quite a sizable amount of people in our population. It's been exacerbated by the isolation that has been a part of the coronavirus and our attempts to put a stop to this terrible, terrible scourge on our society. So when we talk about social isolation, we have to understand that there are precipitating factors that, again, exacerbate this condition. But currently, data has identified that 1 in 5 older adults are subject to social isolation and its effects. Isolation has been identified as a major cause of health issues and concerns. Research basically has shown that negative health effects from chronic isolation and loneliness can be very harmful to individuals, not just the elderly, but individuals of all ages. Individuals who are elderly are especially susceptible to it in that they have far fewer resources that are readily available. There is some data that's coming out of reports that show that there are declines as individuals age in terms of what they perceive to be loneliness and isolation. So again, that the full picture is still developing. Social isolation and loneliness have been associated with high blood pressure, and the numbers of individuals who are being diagnosed with high blood pressure are increasing because of difficulties that people have with dealing with the dynamics of this coronavirus. It also creates an environment where there is increased susceptibility to the flu. There are greater risks for heart disease and other chronic conditions, as well as there has been an increase in earlier onset of dementia. Now, let me give you a specific as it relates to social isolation. It's been identified that social isolation in and of itself as a health risk is a stronger risk factor than an individual smoking 15 cigarettes per day. 15 cigarettes per day. That's quite a bit of number of cigarettes. We as a society have been conditioned, if you will, to understand the severity of smoking and its impact on our health. So when we compare social isolation to smoking 15 cigarettes per day, that should give us a barometer as to the impact of social isolation and subsequently loneliness and the condition that it presents. So let's keep that number in mind, 15 cigarettes per day. There are conditions that are subjective in nature, and some of the subjective feelings, particularly as it relates to loneliness, are that it can increase our risk factors for death as much as 45%. Data and statistics have shown that 17% of adults age 65 and older are identifying, or that through diagnostic tools, they are determined to be socially isolated. Of that population, 46% of women ages 75 and older, they live alone. And this is a contributing factor to loneliness, as well as the factor of social isolation. In our older adult population, we have identified that those individuals who describe themselves as being lonely have a 59% greater risk for functional decline. Now, when we talk about functional decline, we talk about a decrease in their physical and or cognitive functioning levels. When a person is unable to engage in ADLs or activities of daily living, that compromises their ability to be fully functional. And it adds to the situation of loneliness and isolation. It's been statistically shown that, particularly as it relates to individuals who are hospitalized, functioning decline can start to manifest within 2 days of hospitalization. So we look at that environment being an acute care environment, and we understand that that transfers as well to individuals who are isolated in their homes. And I will oftentimes refer to the COVID-19 as a precipitating factor in loneliness and social isolation. So with that population and the conditions that we're faced through coronavirus, we're seeing that that 59% greater risk is substantial as it relates to functional decline. Also, as part of the statistics is that 45% of individuals in studies have identified that the risk factors are greater for death of those individuals. So coupled with the risk factors for functional decline, which subsequently can lead to increased risk of death, these are very important issues that we're talking about here today. So let's talk a little bit about one thing. We want to make sure that you understand that there are processes that are available that help individuals to identify where functional declines are happening. Things such as paying attention to healthy diet, exercising regularly, managing chronic diseases. Those are all factors or things and ways by which we can prevent the onset of functional decline. So I can talk a little bit more about that. This presentation, I have to add, is somewhat truncated in that we are under time constraints. So I am not able to go into great detail as it relates to some contributing factors, but information is available through studies available through AARP, as well as other organizations that I'll talk about later on. Let's talk a little bit about another major factor as it relates to social isolation and loneliness, and that's costs. We've seen there has been an escalation of costs associated with these disease processes and conditions. Social isolation among older adults is associated with an estimated $6.7 billion in additional Medicare costs as it relates to annual spending. Broken out as it relates to other conditions that individuals are dealing with, social isolation adds about $134 per month for individuals that are socially isolated, and again, particularly those elders. That equates to about $1,608 more annually that comes out of the Medicare budget. compared to other conditions that are adding to the cost of those services. High blood pressure is estimated to add about $117 per month. Arthritis, $163 per month. Diabetes, $241 per month. Heart disease, $270 per month added to the Medicare bill. So if we're dealing with a condition such as social isolation and loneliness, we look at not just the cost of $134 a month more, but if that social isolation and loneliness is compounding the situation, we factor in those other costs. So what we see is an escalation of budget dollars that are necessary to combat this condition. So currently, again, the number is about $6.7 billion added annually to the Medicare budget. And there's also identifiable evidence that 14% of older adults are registered in Medicare. So at this point, what I'd like to do is shift the conversation to better acknowledge what is social isolation. Now, social isolation is a result of individuals being disconnected from their support groups and their families, also disconnect from friends as well as their community. And there are a myriad of different factors that add to that scenario. Let's talk a bit about risk factors and causes for social isolation. We'll start with from a societal and a community standpoint. We've identified that limited or unaffordable transportation is a major factor. When individuals, or particularly in the aging process, when they no longer have resources such as capacity to drive to appointments or to get groceries, or to do other things that will engage them socially, politically, or in other levels, then they increase the opportunity for the onset of social isolation. So we need to make sure that we're focusing our resources on how do we improve on provision of transportation that allows individuals to stay socially engaged. We also must look at the rural environments in which individuals are living in. Are those conditions in the rural areas accessible for the provision of services to individuals to prevent social isolation and subsequently loneliness? Are there unsafe conditions within neighborhoods and communities that prevent individuals to access resources that may be available to them? One of the things that I feel strongly is that equally as important as not having resources is the inability to recognize that resources are available and means by which to access given resources. So what are we doing to recognize the rural environments? What are we doing in our inner city areas or areas that may be suffering from high crime rates that will curb the individuals from being socially isolated? There are social barriers also that may be factored in, such issues as ageism or other forms of discrimination that would prevent individuals from being welcomed into groups or organizations that may be a support tool for them. So we need to really focus on those societal as well as community changes that are necessary from a prevention standpoint as we deal with social isolation. Next, we'll talk about from an individual perspective what individuals may be faced with. Low income certainly will be a cause by which individuals will have lack of opportunity for engagement. Being a caregiver, we often talk about the care recipient, but I'm going to spend just a moment here now, and certainly some of our presentation that AARP provides gives more detail about caregivers and what we need to be doing for caregivers. But being a caregiver also isolates individuals because if you're working, if you're caring for your family and you're caring for a loved one, it leaves very little time for social engagement or involvement in things that bring pleasure to an individual. So that's one of the precipitating factors as well. Chronic health conditions will preclude individuals from engagement thus providing an ideal environment for the onset of social isolation. Hearing and visual problems are major factors. If an individual can't hear or can't see discussions, then training or resources is not provided in an environment that's conducive for engagement by individuals with hearing difficulties or diminished hearing or vision, then they will not get the full benefit of that program. Subsequently, we'll see that participation levels among those individuals is also diminished. Retirement is a factor. When individuals are involved in the workplace, often that leads to higher degrees of socialization, engagement in issues that are current, that keeps them apprised of what's going on in their environment. Once individuals retire, oftentimes those connections are severed and individuals don't have the opportunity to gain access to that vitally important information. Limited mobility also lends itself to the same dynamics as visual and hearing difficulties. If an individual can't ambulate or have means by which to be mobile, to allow opportunities to get out and engage in opportunities, subsequently we're going to see that their engagement level diminishes as well. Living alone, individuals who are not married, who have been divorced, who are separated from their resource base, be it family members or other dynamics within their communities. If they can't get to those resources, then we will see there is an increase in social isolation. Loss of memory, individuals, if they don't feel that they can retain the information, if it becomes an anxiety point for those individuals, then we'll find that there is a curtailment of engagement or involvement of individuals in provided opportunities. Loss of a spouse, certainly individuals who lose spouses tend to extract themselves from social engagement and opportunities. So make sure that we're focusing on individuals who have recently lost a spouse, to make sure that we're providing opportunities for them to incorporate themselves into events and activities within communities. At this point, I'd like to provide a distinction between isolation and loneliness. Isolation and loneliness are very different, but they run concurrently at times. So isolation is usually considered to be, by clinicians, to be objective. Isolation involves qualifiable and quantifiable measurements, such as the size of one's social network and the frequency by which an individual engages within those networks. It also addresses the availability of transportation, which I broached earlier, and the ability for individuals to access resources and information. Whereas on the other hand, loneliness is considered to be subjective, or determined from a clinical standpoint to be subjective isolation. Basically, the things that denote loneliness are how people perceive their own experiences and whether or not they themselves feel that they're isolated. So those are important distinctions between the two, isolations and loneliness. I think that it is worthy of mentioning, and there is also information that expounds on those two principles, isolation and loneliness, available through AARP or AARP Foundation, particularly through the program which is Connect to Affect. And I'll talk a little bit more about that program later on in this presentation. Now, at this point, I'd like to talk a little bit about what can you do about social isolation and loneliness. So the next few slides that are being provided will be a basis by which intervention is possible. We by no measure, I should say, endorse or prescribe or mandate that these things occur, but these are ideas that are worthy of consideration. So please look at these in that intended purpose. So here we go. Tips for getting and staying connected. As I said earlier, connectivity is so vitally crucial for avoiding or to address loneliness and social isolation. So what we'd like to do at this point is talk about steps that can be taken to maintain and or strengthen our ties to family and friends, to expand our social circles, to become more involved in the community around us. I'd like to go through these point by point. I won't spend a great deal of time, but certainly I welcome opportunities to share more information outside this presentation. One of the things that we can do in this environment is to nurture existing relationships. We can do so by inviting people over for coffee or getting together with friends and families to go and see a movie, identifying things that bring joy to one another, and engaging at a level that is rewarding to those who have been invited to participate. Schedule time with each other, or call a friend or visit someone. AARP has several programs available by which individuals can join call pools, which basically allow for individuals to sign up to receive calls. Or on the other end of that spectrum, you can be one of the callers. So there are a variety of different programs that will allow for engagement at both the front as well as back end. By that, I mean, be a recipient of calls that will make you feel engaged and involved in your community, or be the one who initiates those calls. So that's one of the ways by which we can stay connected. There are also opportunities for engagement through volunteerism. Volunteers is the lifeblood of AARP. You know, we can't do our work at AARP without our core of volunteers. So for us, in talking with our volunteers, they seem to, they exude a sense of engagement and sense of purpose in their volunteerism. Volunteer offers the opportunity for individuals to connect with others, to share information. And oftentimes it's an opportunity for individuals in a volunteer role to share expertise that have been gained through their work lives. So this is for individuals very rewarding for them to be able to volunteer because it does, after all, provide that sense of purpose and engagement. A next area that we'd like to bring forward is to get involved with fun groups. It's, for instance, I have seen there's been an elevation of participation in pickleball. You know, when I first heard pickleball being a group activity that individuals could engage in, I thought, you know, it's like badminton or a hybrid of tennis or whatever. Man, the numbers of individuals who are involved in just that particular sport and the benefits derived from their participation is phenomenal. That's only one way by which individuals can engage in group activities. You can also visit your senior centers or your community centers, identify those programs or services that may meet your needs or your interest areas, or as I'll talk later on, lifelong learning is a very important part. Join walking clubs. As I said, one of the indicators of social isolation and loneliness is individuals have a diminishment in their levels of physical and cognitive activities. So by joining walking groups, by staying physical, by including yourself in the mix of physical activities, you can ward off some of these signs and symptoms of social isolation. Take a class, learn something new, expand your circle of friends, because oftentimes there will be individuals within those learning groups that have shared interest areas that will go beyond that class that you're taking. This provides a format by which individuals can expand their horizons. There are classes that are available that are specifically geared to be short-term, impactful, and that are identified to meet the needs of certain individuals who have expressed that desire to learn in a given environment. One simple fact, and this is the last but surely not the least important, is say hello to your neighbors. You know, there have been research conducted that demonstrates that people who live within close proximity to one another oftentimes don't even talk to each other. So reach out to your neighbor, learn who they are, data has also shown that individuals who have lived in one location for over 20 years are far less likely to be isolated, whereas individuals who have moved within 10 years have a tendency to be more isolated in their behavior. So get out, meet individuals within your community, find out what's going on and how you can better engage in those events and activities. Here's the portion of my presentation that I'd like to talk a little bit about local organizations and resources that they bring forward. I talked a little bit earlier about senior centers and community centers. They are vital parts of our communities. They do, however, suffer from a condition of lack of funding. So one of the things that you might want to do when you're dealing with your loneliness and social isolation is engage in advocacy-based work. Community centers are a great place by which to understand what the issues of concern are, and then to identify where you may be able to help out. So go to your community centers or your senior centers. These are a great place for, again, strengthening your nutritional care. Go out there and have lunch with friends and family members. So the senior centers and community centers are a great place to do so. Multi-generational programs. It's been proven that by association, individuals who are in the advanced aging process, they derive great joy and pleasure from working with young kids. So how are you able to access multi-generational programs within your community is a very important question, and certainly worthy of follow-up to see how can you engage and be involved and contribute. These kids oftentimes lack role models or lack means by which to understand what opportunities may be available to them. As a former working professional, you can provide insight into job opportunities or career paths. So multi-generational programs can be of a great benefit, particularly from the exchange of information standpoint between elders and younger people coming up. City, county, state government agencies are a great resource because oftentimes they are able to delineate programming available to individuals within communities. So look to those state governments, city governments, and county governments to be a pathway by which to learn of offerings that are available in your community. Faith-based organizations and church groups have always been a steadfast means by which individuals can gather. They can be engaged in fellowship that oftentimes are very rewarding, or you can still engage with organizations that are not religion-based, but maybe faith-based, and there are differences between the two. So look at that as a viable alternative to staying at home and doing nothing. Library, tourism groups, Chamber of Commerce are a great source of information and insight as to happenings within your community. Support groups. AARP has devoted a great deal of attention and resources to recognizing the problems faced by grandparents who have had their retirement deferred because they are now required to take care of their grandchildren. New Mexico, by the way, leads the country in number of grandparents who are in fact being the primary caregivers for their grandchildren. There are also support groups for Alzheimer's, for dementia-related disorders, for other chronic conditions that individuals are faced with. So these are great tools by which individuals can be better caregivers, can be more empathetic and sympathetic to conditions and their onset. So look for support groups that are available within your communities to provide those resources. I'm a veteran of the U.S. Air Force, and I have found that veterans here in New Mexico, a good side of New Mexico, oftentimes we highlight where New Mexico is at the bottom of the list. New Mexico, however, is in the top of the list of numbers of veterans in our state. Our veterans are a very important part of our state's history, and those veteran organizations need your support. We are in the month of November, which is recognized as Veteran Appreciation Month. November the 11th will be Veterans Day. So get out and support your veterans. not only the veterans, but their family members, because the veterans' family members are an important part of how they conduct their work. So get engaged, get involved, provide support to our veteran organizations. Food, clothing banks, thrift stores, rescue missions are a great source of involvement for individuals. And finally, the lifelong learning organizations. Those organizations are solely committed to identifying opportunities that provides betterment of lives of individuals who want to do more than they're currently doing. They have specific interests. So check places like Oasis here in New Mexico that are providing a platform for lifelong learning. The next part of the presentation is fixing broken connections and talking about what we can do to help people thrive in these environments. These particularly are organizations that can help people fix broken connections. In that regard, we want to make sure that we are capitalizing on the availability of those organizations to treat health issues that provide barriers to connectivity. These programs can offer services such as fall prevention programs that increase balance, as well as confidence that enables individuals to go out and actually participate in programming. We also need to focus on how are we providing support through major life transitions. I talked earlier about individuals who are in the latter stages of their life becoming caregivers again under the grandparents raising grandchildren concept. We're looking also at major life transition. When we were faced initially with the coronavirus, we found that individuals who normally would get up, get their kids dressed and take them to school, now they're becoming adjunct teachers. So they're taking on roles that traditionally were handled by other professionals. So we now have to understand how are we going to provide support for those individuals that address burnout that is occurring at a very high number within family structures. So what are we doing to support those individuals that make them feel connected and capable of coping with these significant life changes? We need to address continually the societal barriers that exclude older individuals. I talked earlier about the sense of disconnect individuals feel as we age. In the United States, we are in fact a youth-oriented society, and oftentimes elders feel relegated to lesser roles. So what are we doing in our society to knock down some of those barriers that are providing opportunities for elders to feel more included in situations where we're trying to get them to engage at a higher level? A lot of this work will take the form of policy changes. These policy changes will allow for older individuals who find it necessary or enjoyable to re-enter the workforce. So what are we doing around policies at the employment level that provide opportunity for older workers to re-enter or to be productive within our workforce? We're also looking at opportunities that ensure availability of services and supports that are tailored to the needs of diverse communities. At models of how there's a concept called aging in place. Aging in place can provide opportunities for individuals who have lived in large homes that now they might be able to share that home with another person who has similar interests, and it would work out from an economic standpoint for them to share a space. However, there are currently laws that preclude individuals from doing so. So how are we looking at our covenants and restrictions that may restrict cohabitation in certain communities, particularly in single-family dwellings? What are we doing to change the laws that allow for a new concept for housing? And that's just one example of how we can change environments to deal with diverse communities. Finally, on this slide, create opportunities for affordable and accessible transportation. if individuals can't get out and get to transportation, then it's likely that they will not take those opportunities up. We need to make sure that we're putting into place programs that enable communities to develop pools of volunteers that assist, and we reduce the liability of doing so, so that it is more appetizing for individuals to volunteer their services, to get people out to their doctor's appointment, to address the issue of food deserts, a condition where individuals are not capable of getting out to a major shopping center, and they're at the mercy of smaller corner stores that may not have nutritional products available to them. So again, the nutritional value that we see within our elder population or individuals in certain community is not at the level that it would be, say if they had transportation that got at a store where those nutritional items could be more accessible. What is AARP doing? AARP and AARP's foundation to address the situation of social isolation and connectivity that is a part of loneliness. Well, I'm going to show a video here that speaks to that. This is one way that Connect to Effect through AARP Foundation is addressing or recognizing first and foremost, and then putting forward resources to connect people to resources and to have them feel a part of their community. So this is a short video, it's very short, but it talks about one perspective among many that is faced by individuals who are socially isolated and to avoid loneliness.
Hello, Rebecca. How are you doing today here? I need a ride. I live with my wife, my oldest daughter, and her 2 grandkids, and 24-year-old son. My driving life was good until they took my keys away from me. The thought of not being able to get in a car and go where you want to go, when you want to go, is really disturbing to me. I hate having to depend on somebody else. I've been in wound care because I'm a diabetic and the veins in my right leg do not work. Every week I'd go back, they'd unwrap it, wash the leg, rewrap it. I live in a very rural area. To Caregiving, I'd say an hour and a half to 2 hours in the morning. My family keeps trying to get me to change to Pomona because Pomona's closer. I truly believe in Caregiving. My daughter leaves for work at 5 o'clock in the morning. My wife leaves for work at 4:30. My son, I never know what he's going to work because they keep changing his schedule. It's been difficult, and my grandkids are 13 and 12, so they can't take me. I was glad I got in the program. I think it's a great service they've offered to people that basically financially could not afford, like in my case, take a lift from here to Keck. Probably the most fantastic thing is they come to your door, pick you up, drop you off at the door where you're going, and same when you're coming home. My phone will not accept the Lyft app. Consequently, I have to contact the concierge by landline to request a ride. And I have never not been able to get a ride by calling a concierge. They're always there on time, and they always get me to where I want to go on time. I like to just go to the library, go to the market, like go to Home Depot and see what the new tools are. I just like getting out, talking to people sometimes. It's nice being able to go where you want to go. I've always been that way, so this is a big, big change for me. It's given me a new life.
So with that video, I'd like to say that AARP is probably partnering with Lyft in California, University of California Center for Body Computing, United Healthcare Group, as well as other stakeholders on pilot programs that talk about things such as ride-share services, which can improve drastically the management of healthcare access for older adults. Providing older adults is an effective means by which to address the situation of affordable housing within communities, to provide resources such as voice-activated technology, along with that technology training, as well as other means by which to provide for social connectivity. to design and to ensure access to programs that encourage a heightened level of group participation, of individual awareness, and to minimize personal risks for social as well as other forms of isolation. AARP is building wonderful programs that are connected with this particular program, and that's Connect to Effect, which is a platform that's providing collaboration with scientists, researchers, individuals within the academic arena that accelerates activities around what can we do to minimize social isolation and to look at loneliness as a precipitating factor. About AARP Foundation, AARP Foundation works to end senior poverty by helping vulnerable older adults build economic opportunity, as well as to provide social connectedness. AARP is a charitable affiliate which serves AARP members as well as non-members. They bolster their work by vigorously engaging in legal advocacy. They spark bold, innovative solutions that foster resilience, strengthen community, as well as restore hope in themselves and mankind. So AARP Foundation is a wonderful resource for us, and it also can be available to you. Here's the means by which Connect to Effect, which is a central program of AARP Foundation. Their premise is that when people connect, they can affect each other's lives. With that premise, AARP Connect is offering a collaborative effort powered by the foundation to help older Americans and adults build social connectedness that they need to thrive. Here's some information about how you can use that resource, AARP's Connect to Effect program. Just go to www.connecttoeffect.org. You'll find there risk assessment tools, resource finder, information, articles, as well as monthly newsletters, as well as links to volunteer opportunities. AARP also sponsors a program through www.createthegood.org, which provides volunteer opportunities. And finally, if you need more information about this presentation or other services provided through AARP New Mexico, reach out to me at AARP New Mexico. My email address is gdwilliams@aarp.org. That concludes my presentation. At this point, I will stop sharing my presentation. And if there are any questions, I'll be glad to take on those questions at this time.
Gary, you did have a question that came into the chat a while ago, and it is, I'll let you go ahead and check it out and go ahead and answer that.
Okay, let me see here. Can you please, Nicolette, can you, okay.
Mm-hmm. It's
can
from
you read
Casey.
that question for me?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So the question says, social isolation, being homebound because of the COVID pandemic has led to a lack of being aware of current time, day of the week, date for all groups. Most measures of cognitive decline and dementia use this ability, and yet we have learned that having no perceptible difference between days of the week, being homebound, being retired, or living in a long-term care facility are factors that affect this ability. How can we apply what we have learned from the COVID pandemic and social isolation in general to help us better understand these effects versus actual dementia or minor cognitive impairment?
Casey, wonderful question. And thank you, Nicolette, for assisting with reading that. I was having some difficulty with my screen as well. I hope that my presentation came across well because I kept getting signs of low connectivity. So thank you very much for doing that for me. To your point, studies are right on spot in terms of addressing this situation. As you said, COVID has caused a disconnect between individuals and differentiations between what has been precipitated by COVID and what might be a part of natural processes related to dementia or other related disorders have been blurred. So what AARP is doing as a means by which to differentiate those differences is that we are commissioning studies. There are reports that are available and tools that are available. For instance, AARP 10 years ago conducted a study about loneliness and social connections. This study is the National Survey for Adults 45 and older, and it is available through AARP. I will make that information available, but it talks very specifically about some of the issues that are involved with dementia. It talks about how the pandemic has been an exacerbator of some of these conditions. So to answer Casey's question, there's a blurring currently between what is maybe the cause of some of these cognitive declines, or are they associated with people being isolated, or are they an onset of medical conditions that need to be dealt with in a different environment? So AARP, to answer the question, we're trying to gain access to those answers. We're trying to make available resources that clearly identifies differences as well as commonalities. So I can't answer specifically how we're looking at providing that information other than to say that this study was commissioned recently, and I can make it available to where you can read the synopsis report or gain access to the full report that provides insight as to all the dynamics of not just loneliness and social isolation, but the impact that's imposed as a result of the coronavirus. So I hope that that answers the question. And if not, please use my contact information again, GD Williams at AARP. Reach out to me and I will talk specifically and directly with you, and we will try to identify those resources more detailedly.
Thank you, Gary, for that answer. And that concludes our session for this breakout. And we're going to go ahead and end this session, and all of the attendees can move on to their next breakout. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Nicolette, for your assistance.